So what we're gonna do now is head over here to the old Girl Scout Little House. Okay, we found our fort. There's a little fort up here. Let's go see what it has to say.
It was May 22nd, 1792, when Massy Harbison and her children were taken captive by Indians near modern-day Freeport, Pennsylvania. After following her captors on foot towards modern-day Butler, she escaped and made her way towards Pittsburgh. Massy was discovered and rescued by fishermen on the Allegheny River on May 27th, 5 days after her capture. The story of Massy Harbison. Massy J. Harbison, a woman from the American Revolution, born March 18, 1970, in the decades following the Revolutionary War, was captured by Native Americans in May 1792. Massy escaped 6 days after and gave a deposition. Capture and escape of Massy Harbison, 1792. Mary Jane, or Massey White, was born on March 18, 1770, in Amwell, New Jersey, the daughter of Edward White, a soldier during the Revolutionary War, and Rebecca Pelton, a descendant of Richard Moore, a Mayflower passenger. She and her family resided in Amwell Township, Somerset County, New Jersey, where Massy spent the first 13 years of her life. Her father, Edward White, was a soldier who fought in the Revolutionary War for 3 years. After the Continental Army defeated Great Britain, Massy and her family became part of a mass migration of Revolutionary War veterans who headed for western Pennsylvania. As compensation for their service defending their country, the impoverished new nation awarded the ex-soldiers land where they could take up residence. These western lands were called depreciation lands and were located north of the Ohio River and west of the Allegheny River. Redstone Fort, located along the Monongahela River, later called Brownsville, is where the White family would call home. Massy married John Harbinson in 1787 in Pennsylvania. John was born in Belfast, Ireland, the son of Matthew Harbison Jr. and Margaret Carson. Although her parents objected to their union, Massy married John Harbinson in 1787 at the age of 17. After 2 years of marriage, Massy and John became disillusioned with their family and decided it was time to move and plant roots somewhere else. A fresh start for the both of them was found at the headwaters of Chartiers Creek, where the family prospered. All hopes of a pleasant and peaceful life ended with the outbreak of the Indian War in 1791. Because of Indian raids on the pioneer settlements along Deer Creek and Bull Creek, John, Massy, and their sons fled during the night to safety. Once again, they had to start over. They built a cabin near a newly constructed pioneer fort called Red Station, which was located where River Forest Golf Course is today. Unfortunately, John was away on a scouting mission when his wife and children were captured by a party of Indians who attacked Reed's Fort on that fateful day in May 1792. On the morning of Tuesday, May 22nd, 1792, Massy was abruptly wakened when an Indian pulled her from her bed by her feet. To her horror, a group of Seneca and Muncie Indians were ransacking her home and stealing her possessions. Startled and confused, she held her year-old son in her arms and tried to protect herself and her children from harm. Massy, who was 6 months pregnant at the time, her infant son John, and 5-year-old Robert stood outside their cabin. 3-year-old Samuel, who was inside the cabin, was still crying and making a fuss about all the upheaval and destruction going on. Indians refused to tolerate this kind of behavior. They picked up the boy by his feet and bashed his head against the threshold of the door. They also stabbed and scalped him. Witnessing the brutality of the killing of her child, Massy let out a terrified scream and fainted. The Indians then brought her back to consciousness by hitting her over the face and head. Massy, sickened by what had just happened to her child, was forced to walk barefoot in the night and in her nightclothes with her 5- and 1-year-old son to a group of horses. They traveled on horseback to the mouth of the Kissamassanas River. When they reached the bank of the river, they went to a canoe to Todd's Island, which is located between the Kissamassanas River and the Big Buffalo Creek on the Allegheny River. Upon their arrival, 5-year-old Robert was crying over what had just happened. back at the cabin, one of the Indians took a tomahawk and killed and scalped the child. Massy was forced to witness the murder of another one of her sons. Massy and her sons then made their way back to camp located near present-day Butler, Pennsylvania. That night, the Indians laid a blanket on the ground for Massy to sleep on, tied her hands and her feet together to prevent her from escaping. In the morning, Massy and her baby continued to trek another way to another side of the camp, where she spent another night. Just as the sun was rising the next morning, she was able to slip loose of her ropes, get her hands free, and escape with the baby in her arms. Tired and cold, and without food for herself or her baby, she remained abstinate and determined to survive. She continued on her journey, suffering from exhaustion, hunger, and fear of recapture. Massy used her orienteering skills that her husband had taught her to find her way to the wards of the Allegheny. She collected leaves to make a bed for herself and her son to protect them from the elements. During her escape, she was forced to hide in the branches of a fallen tree to evade detection from a savage. In another instance, Massy came face to face with a nest of rattlesnakes while looking for a place to hide.
Massy traveled for 4 long days, arriving at the banks of the Allegheny River near Fox Chapel. Hurt, tired, and starving, Massy noticed a few men crossing the river, one who she knew to be her neighbor. Although she could clarify him, her long journey had altered her appearance to such an extent that he did not recognize her. At first, the men were afraid to rescue Massy, as they were afraid that she was being used as a decoy by the Indians. Finally, Massy was taken to a nearby cabin where over 150 thorns were removed from her feet and legs. The skin on her feet was so badly torn they were hanging by shreds. She was unable to walk for 2 weeks. Her exposure to the elements and her inability to put down her son for fear that he would cry out left her fatigued and in great pain. Massy was reunited with her husband the day after her rescue on May 28, 1792, and they moved to a new house near Coast Station on what is now present-day New Kensington, Pennsylvania. In the following years after this, John and Massy relocated several times and established Harbinson Mill. John continued being employed as a scout and spy while Massy raised their 11 children. John, unhappy with the marriage and wanting to move west, left her and her 3 youngest children with no means of support and no place to live. Massy's oldest children had already left the home and started their own families and homes of themselves, and Massy was fortunate enough to be invited to go ahead and stay with them. Massy divorced her husband on October 6, 1820. To provide an income for herself, she published her diary describing the events leading up to her kidnapping and abduction, and the slaying of her young children, and the story of her fortitude and survival. The first edition of the completed diary was published in Pittsburgh in 1825. She sold the book door to door in hopes of making profit. Her story was an instant success and received great reviews. In 1837, 12 years later, Massey Harbison died at the age of 67. Her final resting place is in the New Freeport Cemetery, where her and her son James and his wife are buried as well. On the frontier tombstone are the words "Captured by Indians May 22nd and escaped May 27, 1792. There is a marker showing the exact location where Massy was abducted by Indians at the 3rd green of River Forest Country Club. The park is called Massy Harbison Park, a memorial of this brave frontier woman. The log cabin in this park is similar to the one that Massey Harbison would have lived in. Well, thank you guys for checking out this channel. And if you like this video and videos like this one, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and share this with your friends. And as always, remember to get out there and explore. Thanks, guys.